Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your music. On this very special evening of a terrible day, we have to say, of a terrible day, because this is the day, 24th February 2022, that the all-out war in Ukraine started. And that's why we're here tonight. And we're very happy, and I hope that it was good for your soul, at least it was good for my soul, to hear wonderful music by 3 musicians from Ukraine playing Ukrainian music. So thank you again very much. So good evening to all of you. Welcome in the Balie. My name is Albert. I'm the director of the Balie, and I'm conducting this evening tonight. We've been listening to Galina Bilic and 2 musicians, the violinist Galina Bilic and 2 musicians from the chamber ensemble from Kiev, Mikhailo Bilic and Andrei Vasin, and both of you have traveled from Ukraine, from war-torn Ukraine, to play here tonight. I think that's also mind-boggling, and I can't imagine what it must be for you to do that. So, yeah, again, thank you so much. Tonight, we have a full program. Like I said, it's the 3rd anniversary of the bloody war, the bloody Russian war in Ukraine. And it's a bloody war, but it's also a hybrid war. And that's less obvious because you don't really see it. Because it's hybrid, because it's not hot, because it's difficult to point out. So we're focusing tonight on that aspect. Also because Ukraine has been torn by that sort of hybrid warfare, but also we will talk about the hybrid war that Russia is waging outside of Ukraine. From destroying critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea to spreading disinformation. And are we fully aware of the real threat when we're actually fighting, when the actual fighting is taking place in Ukraine, but are we actually aware of the real threat which is wider than the front in Ukraine? Those are questions we're trying to address tonight. And it has been obvious, I would say, to everybody following the news that false narratives and disinformation actually get into the heads of some politicians, even in the West. Recently, to our surprise, not only a Dutch minister, but also an American president. One of the questions might be, aren't we already in a hybrid war? Aren't we already at war? This evening we will delve into these questions with a great panel of experts. NATO Assistant Secretary General Jean-Charles Ellerman Kingombe, who's here. Social media and disinformation expert Pekka Kaljoniemi, who's been here before, from Finland. And cybersecurity expert Kira Lebeneko, if I pronounce it rightly. There's a lot of Ukrainian names. My Ukrainian is not that good. I've been there several times. It's a wonderful country, but my Ukrainian is still not that good. We will have a short intermezzo by Jante van Schaik. That's a Dutch woman. That's more easy for me. Welcome to you too. And we will be briefly speaking with Kiev, with Serhiy Prokopenko, head of the operations department of the National Cybersecurity Center of Ukraine. So we have a lot to do. But first and foremost, first I'm very, very happy also to point out that the Ukrainian chargé d'affaires is here tonight. It's a great honor to have you as well on an evening like this, Mr. Anatoly Solovey, acting ambassador, because the former ambassador has been called back to Ukraine as a member of cabinet. So we have Mr. Anatoly Solovey, and I'm just, if I may, I'm going to come over and ask you a few questions. I'm very, very happy that you're here tonight, Mr. Solovey. On this amazing evening of the 3rd anniversary, we cannot say, but the 3rd year your country has been in full war. What is this day to you? What is this evening to you? How do you feel about a day like this?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Yuri, for having this discussion. That's very important for all Ukrainians, and I believe for Dutch people as well. These 3 years were full of pain and suffering and destruction for Ukrainians, but as well 3 years of unprecedented courage and resilience. And Ukrainians have demonstrated to the entire world that freedom is worth fighting for. Of course, today our hearts and minds with our soldiers who on the front defend our country from Russian aggression, and definitely our major priority today is to help them with what we have. Today we also remember everyone who has paid the ultimate price for our right to live in free Ukraine and in free Europe. I believe that probably we have feeling today, all Ukrainians are living in the Netherlands and present here, and also in Ukraine, the feeling of gratitude, profound gratitude to our partners, to our friends. And I believe that probably to the Netherlands a bit more than maybe to many others, because your country is ranking among the top 5 in terms of military assistance to Ukraine. The Netherlands is an extraordinary leader in many defense coalitions like F-16s, Patriots, and tanks, or artillery ammunition, and many, many others. I cannot but mention outstanding Dutch leadership on the track of bringing aggressor to account.
Can I ask you one other question, if I may? And we're talking about hybrid war and disinformation among that tonight. This week we saw the American president saying that your president is a dictator and that you shouldn't have been invaded, but that you should have started a war. How do you react to it? How do you feel about that?
Well, as a for Ukrainian diplomat, it would be deeply inappropriate to comment on the on the words of United States President, but my feeling is what we should do is avoid emotional reactions. We see today a lot of narratives. Not in the last, not least, many of them were launched by Russian propaganda. And I believe that we should be grateful to our American friends because they did really a lot to help us. Because, well, 3 years ago, I'm sure you remember, the world gave us only 72 hours to stand before we fall. Today, we reclaimed more than a half of lands occupied by Russia in 2022. And we are thinking together with our partners, with Americans, with Europeans, with Dutch, about peace through strength. And definitely, we should continue talking to our friends and be together.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Acting Ambassador Solveig. And if I'm not mistaken, I hope that we have a connection now with Kiev, and that will appear, because I'm going to talk to Serhii Propopenko, and he is there. We spoke a little bit before you all came in to the hall online already, so I hope you're able to hear what I'm saying, Mr. Propopenko. And I'm very happy that we meet you and that you take the time from Kiev to talk with us. Are you safe at the moment? Is it, if I may ask a personal question, is it you are in Ukraine at this moment? You might be in Kiev. Is it safe to sit in a room and talk to us over the internet, or?
For these 3 years, we get used to be safe, even when probably it's not fully safe.
No. And not fully means that there might be a bombardment any moment, or is that what should we think about that here in safe Amsterdam?
Two last nights we had record numbers of shellings, and probably today Russia likes anniversaries, and they will try again to send a lot of drones and a lot of missiles on our cities.
So we read in the papers, but thank you for even more for joining us and taking the time to talk to us. You are the head of operations of the Department of National Cyber Security in Ukraine. Is there anything you can tell us what you've been learning or about cyber warfare in the past years? Is there anything which is not too secret, which you can share about how you go about in that department of your army and of your security forces?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to speak. It is now 3 years ago that Russia started full-scale aggression against Ukraine, and for many Ukrainians, February 22 in 2022 was the dates where their lives changed forever. I remember also the day I back home at 2 a.m. and a couple of hours later I was woken up by explosions and a call from my colleague who was on duty that night. According to the protocol, he said, and I understand that the war begins. And in fact, for those who are involved in cybersecurity in Ukraine, the war began earlier. We starting this process from January 2022, when Russia conducted large-scale hybrid operations with cyber attacks on dozens of government institutions and a disinformation campaign. But for us, it was not only a mistake or fault, but also an incentive to improve our cybersecurity processes.
Yeah.
So we have called for cyber volunteers, and another consequence was the creation of joint response groups that worked around the clock. And actually, the most intensive days were about 7-10 days just before the full-scale invasion, where we have very intensive cyber attacks, and we recorded incidents almost every minute. But we survived, and not only those days and nights. Now we are fighting for 3 years in confrontation with a much stronger enemy. Actually, we are very grateful to our cyber warriors who are fighting in cyberspace against Russia and protects our networks, to our cyber volunteers who support all the initiatives, and they support both military and civil initiative in cybersecurity. Also, I'd like to thank our partners who provide support to our country, especially Netherlands, that gives a lot in cybersecurity via Tallinn mechanism and other.
Have you seen, Mr. Prokopenko, have you seen big changes in the way the Russians attack you? Is there a huge development in it, or lately
Yes.
or recently?
We divide all the, say, cyber war for several stages, and now in seventh stage, they change a lot of tactics, and I said that in the beginning it was like a carpet bombings where they trying to attack everything they can. Now they are much more efficient, and they target our government, our defense sector, our telecommunications and media with targeted attacks. The main goal is usually intelligence and data collection, or if we are talking about media, it is some influence operations. But Russia still conducts destructive attacks on our civil infrastructure, and at the end of last year, in December, they tried to destroy all the information in our state registries, in our Ministry of Justice. And even this month, when the temperature were lower and the cold stand on the territory of Ukraine, they attacked our energy facilities, destroy the information, destroy the operation, and cut off the heat and the electricity to our citizens.
Mm-hmm. Would you
Very
please? Yeah.
Yes, another very important tendency is that they coordinate their cyber attacks with shellings and kinetic attacks, and also with informational operations. So they are developing I can summarize that they are developing their capabilities in conduct military operations in all domains, including cyberspace. And important, they share that bad experience with their evil partners. And we see that Northern Korea is fighting in Europe against Ukraine, but now we expect also their notorious hacking groups to attack our infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. As well, so not only military attacks by bombs, but also the cyber attacks, even also from North Korea. And would you say, we'll be talking here to NATO Assistant Secretary General Alaman Kingombe. I was just wondering, what would you, as the head of the operations department of national cybersecurity, what would you need from partners in Europe or in America? What would be your two most things you would need from Europeans to assist you or to help you in this cyber war, to win that war?
It is a big question, actually, and probably for operational level, it is worth to improve exchange of cyber threat intelligence and share more information about cyber attacks that Russia conducts both in Ukraine and in European countries and NATO countries. Because actually we see that now Russia directing more and more efforts in Europe, and one of the goals is to undermine the support of Ukraine, but also intervene in elections. To achieve these goals, they recruit agents, they recruit their own citizens that are living in Europe to conduct different malicious activities. Their special services and intelligence actively use pseudo-hacktivists to attack European infrastructure. For example, for the last 6 months, most of the attacks were against Europe and NATO. Only about 20% of attacks were directed on Ukraine. So we need to coordinate our activities, and I think it's probably time to discuss creating joint response groups that will be able to work or to fight against Russian threat actors. Also, we see that Russia actively use and improving the use of artificial intelligence, of other modern technologies, and probably it's time to discuss how to limit its access to modern technologies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Serhiy Prokopenko, for joining us and for explaining a little bit what you're up against and what the cyber warfare is about. Thank you very much for joining us from Kiev, and we will be conducting a conversation with the NATO Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid and Cyber. So I will bring your points to the table to him. Thank you very much for joining us. And like I already announced, Mr. Eleman Kingombe is NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid and Cyber, and I would love to invite you to come to the table here with us. Please. One of our other speakers already gave you a book, but we will get to that later, I think. You have had a long career as a Danish diplomat and civil servant with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among others, and the Prime Minister's office before joining NATO last year, 2024. Serving as the highest advisor to the Secretary General, we do know as our former Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, who's a close colleague of you, advising him on all matters of technological innovation and cyber war and hybrid threats, as I understand. Very warm welcome to you as well. Wonderful to have you. You just drove over from Brussels, which is with the traffic and the weather probably not that easy as well, but less hard than joining us from Kiev anyway. But if we've been listening to Kiev just now, and listening into it, I was wondering what your thoughts would be on what you just heard out of Kiev.
Well, first of all, thank you for seeing me. And
wonderful
I think,
for you to come.
On a day like this, I think, first of all, it's also important to remember, I think, the tremendous inspiration that we draw from the fantastic fight of the Ukrainian military, but also the atrocity that the population has been having to withstand for the past 3 years. The resilience that the chargé d'affaires mentioned, I think that really draws a lot of inspiration for us. I'd like maybe to make a couple of more general points.
Please do.
I'm very happy to speak about hybrid.
And then we get back probably to
and then I mean 4 points. First one is, I think, in the middle of all the gloom, I think we shouldn't forget that these 3 years are also the story about the West, about NATO being able to stand together, be unified in supporting Ukraine. I think many were questioning whether we could. I'm convinced that Putin certainly did not count on our ability to stand together. I think that is an important lesson that we take with us. Second thing is that the war has also shown it's a war of attrition, it's a war of where mass makes a difference. I think it has raised an important discussion with ourselves about our own preparedness. As we have been donating our military stocks to Ukraine, we have realized that that refilling those stocks was more difficult than we would have thought. And that raises an important discussion about our own defense production and of the need to create what we call a war mindset. Third, this has again, with more strength, reinvigorated the debate about burden sharing in NATO. Lots have been said about US questioning NATO. We don't hear that, but US are saying Europe needs to take its fair share, which we believe it's a very, very legitimate question. To take that fair share will require massive extra investments in Europe, and I think that's an important conversation that we will be having in the coming years, already in the coming months. And then fourth, a point about innovation, which I also work with. It's very interesting when you watch and you follow the war in Ukraine. On the one hand, you have, a flashback to the World War I with the trench war, mass attrition. At the same time, you see unfolding a completely new set of war, where drones, yes, but also AI, a complete new way of dominating the war battlefield is playing out in front of us, where development, we talked a lot about the Ukrainians' fantastic ability to develop, innovate on the spot. But in the face of that, the Russians are doing the same. So there's a tech race that we also need to adapt to. So a number of important lessons from that war. So I think that would be my first immediate comment before going to the hybrid.
So you're saying we've seen amazing amount of technical innovations happening on the front lines. It looks sometimes like the First World War, but it's also very much a 21st century new war.
It is, and it's one thing which is really changing the battlefield is becoming completely transparent because of drones within approximately 3 kilometers of the line of engagement. You can see everything. It's enormously difficult to hide. That changes a lot of things. We see with all the drones, we are collecting enormous massive data. How to crunch all that data and put it as a decision-making mechanism available for the military personnel. AI is helping us doing this, and as such is reducing massively decision-making time. It's also helping us to improve substantially targeting and therefore the number of shells that we actually need to use. So the new technology is also improving the use of all technology. So in many ways there are very, very strong lessons to learn, and as a matter of fact, for that reason, last week we have inaugurated for the first time a joint NATO-Ukraine organization called JTAC in Poland, which is a joint center where we collect and learn from the lessons from Ukraine that will inevitably also impact how we approach things in NATO.
Mm-hmm. And if we come to what Mr. Prokopenko just said, he said, well, we need exactly what you're just telling us, but more of it, information sharing, because like he said, he pointed out that 20% of the cyber attacks is actually happening in Ukraine and 80% of Russian attacks outside. I don't know how he knows that, but if that's true, there's a real need, of course, of cooperation and information cooperation.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate in percentages. I don't have the figure, but what I can say with certainty is that we are also seeing. I mean, what you see in Ukraine is hybrid and kinetic warfare going hand in hand.
Yeah.
But we are also have seen a great uptick since the war started in Ukraine 3 years ago. A massive increase in intensity, but also in recklessness of hybrid attack on NATO countries, really with two goals, and although in our own terminology, in our own strategies, we've referred to it as hybrid, but we don't actually like the word hybrid because it kind of it doesn't give you an intuitive understanding of what's at stake. And what's at stake is really a destabilization intent. I mean, hybrid is a combination of many different tools. You've got cybersecurity, as we were just discussing. You've got sabotage, assassination. You've got moving of immigrant borders, interfering in elections. All these tools together are part of an organized campaign, a well-resourced campaign, and a campaign that has the purpose of destabilizing the receiving countries, and it's an integrated part of the military doctrine of the Russians. So the first thing they do is to hybrid in order to provide them options before deciding whether or not to move into a next more kinetic stage. So it's important that we understand.
A kinetic stage is a stage with tanks and bombs.
That's tanks and bombs and what we will usually refer to as war. So it's showing that destabilization that can give them more options before deciding. That doesn't mean that they've decided to, but this is a part of providing them those options.
But you say we do, and you have assassination, you have destabilization, you have misinformation, you have all these. And do we have all those things? Are we seeing all these elements? Are we seeing them now?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we see them, and we're seeing them, as I said, both with increased intensity.
With increased intensity, yeah.
So the number of cyber attacks, etc., other types of interference we're seeing increasingly, and we're also seeing, as I mentioned before, with increased recklessness, which is worrying. There has been arsons in supermarkets, etc. Luckily, without any casualties, but more luck than probably deliberate. So that is a concern. And
interference with elections, you say?
Well, we have seen in the past year both elections in Moldova and in Romania. And in both countries, they have actually done quite substantial forensic work subsequently to kind of understand what is the Russian playbook. And if you take, if I dwell on that a little bit, and just to give you an impression that this is just not one small thing. So really the playbook comes in 3 stages. So before the election, you do cyber attacks. You recruit hoodlums that you bring to your own country and train them in how to wreak havoc. You engage with the Orthodox Church. You engage with influencers that also have impact in the country you want to target. You do a detailed mapping of where there are sympathies or antipathies for your country in the country you want to target, in order to devise payment schemes. So that you do that before the elections. Then, during the elections, you activate those payment schemes. You make sure that those hoodlums that have been trained, they go out to the voting stations in areas that are not favorable to your own cause. You activate influencers and other opinion makers. And not least, you do massive cyber attacks, so you prevent the electronic electoral systems to communicate between voting stations. Massive operation during the elections, and then after the elections, if the result anyways come out against your wishes, then you orchestrate demonstrations, you facilitate that the people can do legal challenges, you continue the cyber attacks. So all this to say that these are complicated, complex operations that they are patient, they are prepared over time, they are well resourced, and so it's important that we understand this complexity.
And you're saying that they're part and parcel of integrated part of Russia's military doctrine, actually, to create options for a kinetic part of the war, which we call classic warfare.
For Russia, what we call hybrid warfare, is an integrated part of the military doctrine.
Yeah.
With that purpose in mind.
Yeah.
And it's important to underline that doesn't mean that they have taken the decision to go to a kinetic stage, but it's about 2 things.
Well, they
have not.
They have
NATO.
in Ukraine.
They have in Ukraine.
Yeah.
They haven't got and I think it was said here. What you see today, when I say they go hand in hand, when they bomb the energy systems, the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, at the same time they do cyber attacks. So there they go hand in hand. There was massive cyber attacks in Ukraine before the kinetic stage started. So for Russia, this is an integrated tool in their doctrine. But I think, again, it's important to underline that as far as NATO is concerned, they have not yet decided to do an attack, and we don't know if they will. We have 75 years of successful deterrence with Article 5, and that's also why I mentioned before that I think an important lesson learned now is that we need to shift to a war mindset and to make sure that we will also, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, have a similar strong deterrence to a strengthening of our military industry.
But if you call these attacks, and if you call it a part and parcel of a military doctrine, by what time do we call this an attack on NATO? If there's destabilization of NATO members in the Balkans, in their elections, if there are cyber attacks on our infrastructure, if there's cables being cut in the Baltics, or at what stage are we actually considering it an attack, or are we considering ourselves at war, or is it still the preliminary phase? At what moment do we think no, it's not only Ukraine being attacked, it's NATO itself?
It is us. We can see it. Mm-hmm. So the first stage is we need to establish the facts. We are, if you take the example of undersea infrastructure, in April, May last year, we opened an undersea infrastructure center in what is called the Military Command, Maritime Military Command in Northwood in England, with the purpose of more systematically documenting what's happening. So the first thing we do is what we call situational awareness. We do the same thing with cyber, etc. Then the second thing is, once you've established this situational awareness...
It sounds like then we're sort of street length, the Russians are street length ahead of us. If you're saying we need to become aware of it, we need to research, it sounds like what you're describing and what the Russians already are ready to do, that we're sort of really lacking behind. Is that a conclusion fair to make? Or is that...
Well, a year ago, I think it was. I'm not sure it is now, because my next point was that after you've established the situational awareness, then what do you do? And a good example is what happened over Christmas in the Baltic Sea. We've seen for some time incidents. Some of them may be deliberate, some of them may be just accidents. We don't know yet because they are under investigation, and we need to await the results of these investigations. But we know the overall intent of the Russians. We have seen a pattern of increased cable cuts. We know that the threat it represents to our infrastructure in that area. And as a result, NATO initiated what we call a Baltic Sentry, which is an increased activity, increased physical presence in the Baltic Sea with both ships, overflights. On the back of this, we're also now putting drones in the sea, in the Baltic Sea, to create a technical follow-up mission there. And the whole point here is, and that's how we consider it. We consider this as a response. I mean, if there's something that the Russians will not like, is to have more NATO presence in the Baltic Sea. So in our mind, this is what we call an asymmetric response to the hybrid attack from the Russians. So yes, I think we are in a situation where we see something, but where we are also responding. Those responses will be asymmetric because we are, by nature, I think it's important to recall that NATO is also an alliance based on values. We respect certain ground rules, even though our adversaries don't. So if the Russians attack, put a supermarket on fire, we will not put a supermarket on fire in Moscow.
And if the Russians...
but we have different ways of also imposing a cost on the Russians, and that could be, for instance, increasing our military presence in an area where the Russians are very keen not to see more NATO. It could also be increasing sanctions. It could be a third thing. It could be strengthening our support to Ukraine, knowing that one of the main purposes of their hybrid attack on us is to dissuade us from supporting Ukraine. So the response options and that toolbox at our available to us is also fairly wide. It's just not all the tools that are sitting with NATO. Some of them I mentioned economic sanctions. They are decided by EU. And therefore, it's also very important as we work on our hybrid strategies and our hybrid response measures that we coordinate closely between NATO and the EU.
Mm-hmm. And assassination, you mentioned. As I understand, recently there was an assassination attempt on the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of the bigger German arms developers. That becomes pretty almost kinetic warfare, wouldn't it?
I think there is, as we are seeing, an increased recklessness.
Yeah.
As I described before, there is also an important conversation to be had within NATO of where is it, when are they crossing a boundary that requires a robust response. And I think that is a conversation that we are having now. We are on the basis of the increased activity that we not least saw in the autumn. Allies have decided that we should elaborate a new strategy on hybrid warfare. The last one was from 2015 after Crimea, and this new strategy will be tabled to allies in the next few weeks and will be negotiated ahead of the summit in June. So how the outcome will be, I don't know, but these are certainly some of the questions that are at the heart of that work.
The summit in The Hague, actually. Yeah,
summit in The Hague, yes, just next door.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Maybe a last question before we ask the rest of the panel in, if I might. But a little over a month, you called the global security situation, and I quote, "the worst in my lifetime." And that was a little over a month ago. I'm just wondering how you thought that the global security situation is now, a month later.
I'm not sure it has become much. I'm not sure it has become less complicated.
No.
But again, I think as far as Ukraine is concerned, where we have our focus is that we want to do what we can to help secure Ukraine a just and lasting peace. And a lasting peace is a peace where Putin and Russia will not come rolling in 5 years or 10 years, but a peace where there are the necessary security guarantees to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I think this is the goal. I think this is what we need to evaluate the end result up against. Then on the way there, it's not always things will not always be as straightforward as you would have wanted it. But I think that end goal is what we are working towards in the alliance together with our Ukrainian friends.
You think that a just peace is one thing, that's just and lasting. Do you honestly think that a lasting peace with a man like Putin, as a dictator like Putin, who's been escalating all the time, he started small and bigger, is a possibility at all?
Well, that's. I mean, that is the goal of a deal, and that's also why I mentioned that an important part of a lasting and just peace deal must be the security guarantees to Ukraine that will ensure that this becomes a reality. How those look, that will be the subject of negotiations over the next weeks and months, or the time that it will take. But the ambition is a lasting and just peace for Ukraine.
Maybe just Mr. Prokopenko's last question. A joint response groups to the cyber attacks. Is that something which might be in the papers with Ukraine?
I think
with his office.
I think it's fair to say that we have collaborated with Ukraine on many fronts over the past few years, and including also capacity building, also in some of the areas that we're discussing here. Some of the details of which we cannot go into, but cybersecurity is certainly also an area where we have a close dialogue with the Ukrainians.
Thank you for your frank answers and unprepared questions. We're just having an open conversation. It must be very difficult for you because there's many things, aspects of it, probably very a secret, but thank you for your frankness and openness for now. And let's see whether we can invite 2 more speakers. Two more speakers to the table, to the discussion. I'm very happy to invite you both, Kira Lebedenko and Pekka Kallio-Niemi. Kira Lebedenko is a cybersecurity and disinformation expert and the CEO of a Ukrainian security expert group offering cybersecurity trainings and among others for the Ukrainian military. In the first year of the war, you were active in cybersecurity for the Ukrainian military as well. So thank you very much for joining us and coming over all the way. Warm welcome to you, and a warm welcome to Pekka Kallio-Niemi, social media and disinformation expert from Helsinki, Finland. Making, among many other things on the internet, but making Vatnik Soup, a series on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I think it's supposed to leads X now, but and other social media, and also the ultimate guide to disinformation, author. So thank you both for coming over. Becca, maybe I might start with you. How in your view, what you've been listening to, how does this hybrid cyber warfare relate to the more traditional perception of warfare and military force? How important has it become, actually, in your opinion? The information, the influencing, which is part of the hybrid warfare we've just been described.
I think it's always been important. I mean, look at propaganda; it's always been part of warfare. But I mean, Russia has been very good at utilizing it and use it in the digital space. So if you go back to year 2013, this was the year when Yevgeny Prigozhin started the Internet Research Agency and so on. Mm-hmm. In January of 2013, there was a survey made in Russia about the attitude of Russians towards Ukrainians. And the result of that survey was that over 60% had a positive view of Ukrainians. And then, soon after that, Russians started a massive disinformation and propaganda campaign in their internal media space, in internal information space, TV, social media, so on. And year after that, in January 2014, which was just a few months before the war started, this number had flipped. So over 60% had a negative view of Ukrainians. So I think there we can see the massive influence that these information operations, for example, can have in this kind of closed media space that Russia is. And Russia is one of the few. Russia is basically all they have is they're a gas station, mafia-run gas station. But they are also...
A huge gas station, though.
A massive gas station.
Mm-hmm.
But what they are superpower in influence operations and disinformation. And this is where we are always one step behind. And this is something that they realized long time ago. Already in 2013, they realized that to have conventional warfare, you have to start with the information warfare. And this is something that we do not understand in Europe still, also in the West.
How come are we so stupid here?
I think it's ultimate. I think we are not stupid. We understand the problem, but it ultimately comes
do we understand the problem?
To some degree, yes. I would say that we to some degree, yes.
Would you agree that we understand the problem, the magnitude of the problem? Also looking at
I'm not sure. I mean, that's also why I think I made a specific point before about also explaining to the audience what this hybrid thing is. I think there is need for a conversation about what we are subject to, and that this is part of something that represents a greater threat to us. And I think that conversation, at least, has not filled much in media. I think in media, in recent years at least, it has mostly been focused on the individual event. But I think my point is that these individual incidents are part of a greater campaign with this intent of destabilization. And I think that overall picture, I think, is also just now that we are kind of coming around to the idea that we need to update our hybrid strategy, which was back in 2015, a response to those famous green men that were moving around on Crimea. So I think
the famous green men who were without insignia and
exactly,
occupying
Crimea.
So
I think our own understanding and maturity about also, because I think our impression is that there's still a perception from those that do hybrid attack against us, cyber, and that is not only the Russians, it's also the North Koreans, the Iranians, it's the Chinese, that for them it's still perceived as being cost-free. And that's why, I think we would like to, in our revised approach to hybrid, also to see how can we better deter and impose cost. And that's why I mentioned before, this so-called asymmetric response.
Same question to you. Do you think that we are aware of how complicated and how far-reaching hybrid war goes?
So, in my opinion, when I'm in Ukraine, I live in Ukraine, so every Ukrainian can see this huge amount of different disinformation, information which is just changed, and so we have a lot of information, and we are just somehow people could see this disinformation, this propaganda, but still we need to search for a first source of every post, of every information which we are see. But when I was just in Ukraine, I didn't know that, for example, such a things exists in Europe. But when we moved to Europe because of war, so I saw that the same things we have in European countries. So, and I have a lot of friends who are also moved to European countries, and they do not work in cyber, they do not work in IT, but they still see this influence of this changed information, created information for the European Union countries. And also we can see that it's not just Russian people create this information. It's just sleeping agents of Russia. It's acting agents of Russia. It's people from another countries, but they are just with the minds with Russia in their heads. And they believe that Russia is like a huge country with, and they are right in their just decisions and decision making, and they support them with that. Also, Russia spending a lot of money, dozens of dollars and billions of dollars they are spending for these attacks. And people who do not have a specific specialty, but they do have telephone, they do have computers, and they do have Telegram channels, for example, or they are bloggers who wanted to have money. So they are just using Russian money to be famous. They are creating these channels. And they are just sharing this information. They have influence on these people and for the kids, for teenagers, for old people. It's like the social weak people who do not understand this problem, and they are sharing it among the same people. So it's a very huge problem, and in Europe too. So
and if you saying that you've learned to see it during the war in Ukraine, that's probably in a way easier. Might be strange to say, but when the bombs are falling, it might be easier to see it and believe it. Actually, would you have any? How does Ukraine go about countering that, and would there be any lessons for us lucky ones who are not yet with a real war to be taught to European partners?
Oh, I think the important thing is to share the information. And share these examples of such an attacks, so such propaganda. So to show people how to understand where is the propaganda, where is the change information, how to find this first source, or this how to understand which is where is the true and where is like not true. So it's this information is very important to share this and to have a possibility to share all these examples. I don't know how to realize about the realization of this sharing, but still people need to understand that they need to understand that everything is not like it seems. So everything they need to think on every information, even when
Would
it's
you have
not
an example
important.
of that?
I have an example. For example, I have an example. It's my own example from 2017 year. I was in Turkey with my daughter, and we have a vacation, and we watching TV. So it was already 3 years after this first conflict in Ukraine in 2014. And when I start seeing news, it was Russian channels. And it was like 5 different Russian channels, and they saw that we have now it's like live translation was like live video was, and the dictator explained that so it was Maidan in 2014, like video from that times, and they see that, and they saw that it's like old video, but they explaining that just right now it's in Ukraine, in Kiev, again, fire, so everything, military, so fighting. And I just like, what? No, I just a couple of days I was in Kiev, so it wasn't not. No, so what's wrong? And I called to my husband who is in Kiev, and I asked him like, Max, so is it really so such a thing that we had in 2014? And he like, no. So it's okay, so everything is okay. So I just tried to start clicking from one to another channel, and every channel translated the same. Like they gave the information, the same videos, the same things, and the explanations. That now we have in Ukraine, we have the same. And so I just did the video for him. So like it's live, so it was dictator, and it was like live video streaming. And I did the video for him and sent him. He told me like, no. So I am in Kiev. He was in this high building, and he just did me the video from his side for Maidan, and it was nothing. So even me from Ukraine, just several days from Ukraine, and I believe that it could be like that, so in 2 days. And that time I understand, so I believe that, and I just started to check. And I have people with whom I could check this information, but someone who will see that, and they do not have anyone in Kiev, for example, to see is it true or not, so they will believe in these things, and they will see that, we have, again, in 2017, we have the same conflict.
But not everybody is able to phone home and have somebody shown with their phones send you a video that it's not true. So
yes.
So how to go? I mean, you're saying share the information, but you could phone somebody and actually look at the Maidan and see that's not true. But not everybody has a friend living next to the Maidan.
Yes, but other people need to understand that they have Google, for example, and they could search in Google to ask Google, for example, or neutral question like Ukraine and the current date. So and news from Ukraine. So neutral question. So no like war in Ukraine on this date. So of course Google will give something like this. So something is terrible, or no war in Ukraine for the current date. And so Google, of course, will give some good information. So just a neutral question from that side to see the sources, to see the news, and to read it and to understand what is happening there. for example, or to use Ukrainian official news, official resources. So everything you could use official, which is proven from Ukrainian, for example, government. So everything will be seen there.
Pekka, you're already for years in that business of debunking or diffusing stories which turn out not to be true. Or do you think that that's an option, to be sharing the information and eventually get to the truth? Or
First of all, I'm going to be a bit mean here. I'm going to go back to the previous point. I wanted to finish that the problem is resources with information warfare. It is resources. So if Russia is spending 3 billion euro internally on state propaganda, and what they probably spend much more outside of Russia, and the EU is spending what, 30, 40 million? You can quickly see the discrepancy there. So if you kind of transfer this to conventional warfare, you have equipment worth 3 billion, equipment worth 40 million. Who will win this war? So you can clearly see that there is this big asymmetry in this information warfare already. And that's the problem. Like, we understand what the problem is, but we are not committed to solving it. We are not doing anything to solve it. That's the problem. But yeah, sorry, I forgot your question.
this is very,
I just wanted to make this point.
This is very helpful. This is very helpful. And I saw you wanting to come in on that, and then I get back to the...
All right.
Yeah.
First, I think I wanted to react to what you said, but also what was implicitly in what you said earlier. I think I don't agree with the notion that just sharing information is really not a response in itself. I think much of our resilience comes from understanding what we're facing. So when there's a cyber attack on Finland, for Finland to share it with the other NATO allies so that they can understand what an attack looks like, what are the patterns that the attacker uses, that's valuable information. That is the beginning of creating resilience. Now, much of what we've done, both in cyber attacks, on pushing back on critical infrastructure, etc., is that we've increased the situational awareness. Now, it's true that the Russians, for instance, as you mentioned, have a lot of resources. It could also be that in terms of the government resources, we maybe have less, but we are not alone in the government sphere. And I think for us, a very important answer to the hybrid in these years is that we need to tie public-private partnerships. On the undersea infrastructure, much of that is owned by the private sector. Energy companies, telecom companies, even insurance companies, they sit on piles of data. When you look at cybersecurity, the big companies like the Google, the Microsoft and others, they sit on piles of data. So I think we need to also to bring together the public and the private more closely to strengthen our resilience in that way. And two concrete examples of how we're doing this. The first thing is, I mentioned before, this undersea infrastructure center that we've created in Northwood. Around this, we've created a network of all 32 allies, and we're adding to this network also private companies. So to have an exchange of information with them. That's one thing. The second thing is that we are building right now at the NATO military headquarters in Mons in Belgium, an integrated cyber center where we, for the first time, will place both NATO military and civil staff, all 32 allies, but also private sector. So this idea of tapping in to the wealth of data and knowledge that the private sector has is also an important answer to addressing the resource asymmetry that you are alluding to. So I'm not saying it's the whole answer, but it's an important part of the answer. And that means that we can do more than what NATO or EU can do on its own if we also are able to tap into to what the private sector has of both knowledge and
Yes,
data.
you're saying, so we're up against a government with a huge budget, but there it's probably only the government, and here we have more allies than just our governments. There's private sectors as well, and there's private citizens. And then I'm coming back to the question I was posing, because you are, as a private citizen, engaged in sort of cyber warfare, if you want to call it like that, countering the narrative of the Russians and sort of diffusing it. But would you say after a few years of doing that that's a sort of a path to pursue for us, or are you up against? Is it sort of impossible? I just was wondering how you, from years of experience, would react to that. So, to the.
I would like to think that I personally have made a difference out there in the information space.
Information warfare, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think you mentioned debunking before. I think we have to also think about pre-bunking. Because when you look at Russia, their narratives have been pretty much the same if you go back decades. There's a lot of narratives that come from, for example, from a fabricated text called Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I think it's from 1903 or something, so over 100 years old.
Yeah.
And if you look at what
they're still using the old stuff.
Yes, they're still all using the old anti-Semite tropes from that book, or the global elites taking over the world. It's the same stuff that they're doing today. And even if you look at the conflicts, so most of you probably know that Finland was invaded by Soviet Union in 1939. The
Winter War.
Yes, the Winter War started then. They shelled their own troops in Mainila. They did the false flag attack. They blamed the fascist government of Finland. They started a shadow government of Finnish officials in Moscow, I think, or St. Petersburg. And what their narrative was that Finnish people are being held hostage by this fascist government. And this fascist government needs to go. So does it sound familiar? This is the exact same story that they're now doing in Ukraine. And they are very good at adopting new technologies, but they are not very good at coming up with new stories. They recycle these old stories.
Pre-bunking, that's a word we need to remember. Yeah, pre-bunking. Yeah. Like we just been discussing, it's not only a government thing, maybe it's a citizen's thing to do. And we have asked Jante van Schaik, co-director of the Center for Influence and Disinformation Research, CIDR, nice name for a place like that. It's part of OSINT for Ukraine. OSINT, that stands for Open Source Information Technology. People outside of Ukraine can actually join into this in this conversation, worldwide conversation, or electronic conversation, or internet conversation, web conversation, how do you want to call it? But and that's an important part, might be, to the whole problem of hybrid warfare. And we asked Jante van Schaik to, because he's giving workshops at universities to get students involved, to do a little bit of that here as well. Very warm welcome to you, and the floor is yours, Jante van Schaik.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Yes, indeed, I am the co-director of CIDR at OSINT for Ukraine. OSINT for Ukraine is a foundation, actually, that started as a student initiative at Leiden University from young professionals and students from all sorts of backgrounds. And we have now a tripartite mission of upholding truth, memory, and justice. And CIDR falls under one of those three missions. And within CIDR, we have different departments. We have the wargaming departments, which I want to add on to. And I think one of my main points within that is that in order to fight disinformation, we want to educate and inform the public and uphold our digital literacy. And so we came up with the idea of wargaming, which basically stands for bringing a group of students together and academics to inform them about information warfare and kind of engage them into a simulation where they can understand more. And I think this is one of the most important parts, is to bring civilians together to make them understand what information warfare is and how this information is being spread. So yeah, this is one of the first things that I wanted to add. I'm thinking. Yes, about disinformation in general, I think for the public itself, it's very difficult to understand what disinformation is. And I think a lot comes into content verification. We need to show individuals how to verify their content on social media, but also how to triangulate it and see how they can verify the information that they're receiving, especially on the internet. And we see this new discipline arising, open source intelligence. There are a lot of OSINTers that are coming into this space, trying to share information that they deem is correct, and in the end, they are sharing information that is either not researched well enough. And this is one of the things that we are seeing, and we actually came with OSINT for Ukraine with a project called Amsterdam Matrix, developed by a group of students in the University of Amsterdam, where we aim to verify open source intelligence content on social media, and especially X, to also expose information that has not been verified well enough, and also educate the public on that in that specific instance. So, I mean, from a student perspective, it is difficult to understand how disinformation is being spread in general, but I think it goes through content verification. I think that's one of the most important parts. I'm willing to answer a few questions or go more in depth into a few topics.
And as students can join up with you and be taught how to go about verifying information?
So what we try to do during, for example, the wargaming sessions is to allow the space. A wargaming session that we try to develop is called Toxic Noise. Basically, it is created on information warfare. And we gather two groups of students, we give them a specific doctrine based on the scenario that we've developed, and then we engage them into a conversation where they can submit orders and come up with information that they collect. And once they submit those orders, we as referees kind of elaborate how these orders go through, and then we see how the scenario develops over time. This is not only beneficial for students that are not engaged in security studies or international relations, but also for students that have no background, to kind of understand how the decisions are made on a larger level, but also understand how information is shared on social media or in the information space, I would say. So I think my main point is that as a society, we need to uphold our digital literacy and understand more how to verify content in general.
Thank you very much. You just mentioned this would be on the citizens level. There would be also companies involved in countering. It's not only the state. It's not on its own. But you also said that you're responsible for a strategy concerning hybrid and cyber war, which will be discussed in The Hague. And since we're coming to the end of our evening, not entirely, I'm going to ask people in the audience also to have questions. But I was just wondering, that's really close. Is there something which we can already share of this new strategy you're developing, or is that way too early?
That's probably a little too early, since we haven't shared a draft with allies yet.
No, and it's been a weird week. So it's been a weird week this week. Yeah.
But what I can say is, I think that the ambition is that we want to arrive at a more robust stance, which deters our opponents, also in the hybrid domain, with the view of reducing that increase that we've seen in recent years. I think that is the overall ambition. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And question to you too, both of you. What would you think that would be the most important thing now to do in this hybrid war we're in, or in this maybe pre-kinetic phase, to use the words of the Assistant Secretary General, to do now to strengthen us or to help Ukraine?
First of all, of course, it's collaboration between the government and then business. So every part of this, every stage needs to be collaborate, and of course to share information with one another. Mm-hmm. So and on this level, from the highest level and then to the lowest level. So information is always needed, and if this information will be from the government, from top management of the country, and then it will be shared in the government and in business structures, and the business structures working with the militaries, and then people who work and who listen to all this information, so they will understand. So this information work needed. So this collaboration between countries is also very important. So to share this information, maybe to share some technologies, software, which is, for example, we do not know about this software tactics, maybe new things which are created during we are struggling with on the battlefield and cyber. So and other countries are developing something interesting which could help Ukrainian people to struggle and to defend their country in cyber, for example. So this sharing of this knowledge, of these skills, of everything is very important for Ukraine now. So this support from other countries and sharing the information between other countries and Ukraine, it's very important. Mm-hmm. And it will be important even after war will end.
Mm-hmm. Pekka, same question to you.
Fortunately, I don't have to be diplomatic, so I'm just going to be straightforward. I think we have to realize that we are in a very alarming situation right now with the information and disinformation, especially coming from the United States, from the Trump administration. A lot of the people in Trump's cabinet are actually in that book. And they've been spreading a lot of Russian disinformation, Russian narratives about NATO provoking the war in Ukraine and Ukraine being full of neo-Nazis and so on. So we are in this kind of whole new situation where a country that we consider to be our ally, their leadership is promoting Russian propaganda and bullshit. And bullshit is an academic term, so I can use it. And I want to speak for Europe. We have to wake up to this new situation. And as was said before, we shouldn't react by emotion, but by being rational and come up with some kind of plan for this new situation in the information space.
Yeah, the ultimate guide to Russian disinformation, it's called. And many of the people, I'm glad you mentioned it, many of the people in government positions in Washington at this moment are spreading the narrative, the false narrative about Ukraine and about its president and that sort of things. Yes. So you actually saying we're in a much worse situation than a few weeks ago.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, period, yeah. So we need to act, yeah. Thank you very much, all three of you. I'm looking at the audience. I'm realizing it's getting late, but Veronica is editor of the Balie who edited this program, is coming around with a microphone. If there's somebody who likes to join in, yes, a little bit light in the audience is wonderful. Thank you, technicians.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. This question is for Jean-Charles. You say that Russia is reckless. I would say that Russia actually has an escalation dominance. I say we're actually losing this war in a way, the hybrid war. You say you can impose costs, but I don't really buy it deters Russia at the moment. How can we really deter Russia? How can we really actually impose costs on Russia that really deters them?
Thank you.
First of all, I think you have a very good point about escalation, and one of the things that we will be discussing in the context of the new strategy is actually escalation management. And escalation, we are very often, our knee-jerk reaction when something happens is that, we should probably not respond because there's a risk of escalation. But the Russians are watching us, and they are doing deliberate things to test our response habits, if you wish. So a non-response can in itself incite further escalation on the other side. So I think escalation management is certainly one of the things that we will have to try to come about in this new strategy. Now, I don't agree that we cannot necessarily impose costs. As I mentioned before, I don't think that you should underestimate that it's not in the Russian playbook that NATO increases its presence in the Baltic Sea. I mean, that is a perceived cost for them, just as it was not in their playbook that Finland and Sweden joined NATO. As I mentioned before, you've got in your toolbox further economic sanctions, lots of talk about this famous shadow fleet. You mentioned before that Russia was one big gas station. Now that gas station has actually been put under quite some pressure since the beginning of the war. But one station that has not been under pressure so much is the oil station, and much of that oil revenue that remains at a fairly stable level comes through the shadow fleet that sails through the Baltic. So I mean, there are what we call pressure points, but obviously you need to have discussion. What are these? Are these some that we are comfortable about activating? I think the interesting thing about our response here in the Baltic Sea over Christmas was that, well, we drew actually some of the tools from the military toolbox, increased presence. So that was interesting. It could be the next time it's sanctions. It could be something that is in the EU toolbox. But I think it's also giving up in advance if you say that we have no pressure points on them. And I do think we have.
Thank you. There are many hands. I'm afraid we cannot have all questions, but.
Thank you. I'm actually a journalist from the Moscow Times. We operate in exile here in the Netherlands after being, well, first we left Russia and now we've been banned from Russia. This question is for everybody, but I think particularly from Jean-Charles, I want to know what's taking us so long to respond to this threat. This is the third anniversary of the war. Before that, we had COVID and all the misinformation that came with that. And then before that, we already had discussions about fake news, alternative facts, and potential Russian influence in several elections and referenda across the world. The Nordic countries and the Baltic states already have societal resilience programs to try and educate their citizens about what this looks like. Why are Western European countries and NATO as a bloc taking so long to actually put a plan into action in a way that people in this room can feel in their daily lives?
I think it is. That'll be difficult to match. It's you shouldn't forget that it's in the nature of hybrid that the sender is trying to hide him or herself. And therefore, what the first thing that happens, be it after an arson or a cable cut or whatever, is typically that the country in which it happens starts an investigation. Now, a number of the cable cuts that we've seen in recent years, months, are still under investigation, and it's not unusual that this investigation takes 6, 12. 2 years. I think there is a deliberate speculation from the sender in that insecurity that it creates on the receiving end, and so getting 32 countries united around agreeing that this or that incident can be attributed to a sender, and then we provide a cost. That's difficult, plain and simple. But the interesting thing, I believe, about what we saw in the Baltic Sea was that we actually managed to do that response without a specific attribution. Those incidents are still under investigation. But what we did, we saw the combination of three things. One, an increased number of cuts, deliberate or non-deliberate. Two, We know the overall intent of the Russians in terms of critical infrastructure. They have a dedicated government program that has as an objective to map our undersea infrastructure, to activate that in the case of a war. And three, we knew that if more cuts were chopped, then that would actually present a real problem for the infrastructure of the Baltic Sea. I mean, there was one cable left between Estonia and Finland. East Link 2, I think, was not cut. So the combination of these three things, without attribution, actually, we were able to act in spite of lacking a concrete attribution. We were able also to detain the Finns, detain the responsible captains, sending also very robust measures that within the law of the sea, because we respect the law of the sea, we can actually make sure that you will get consequences. Okay, it could be that it was an accident, but it's not cost-free for you to act such, to provide such poor seamanship. So it is in the nature of hybrid that it's difficult to respond to. But I think what we're seeing now, as a response to the overall situational awareness that we're seeing, an appetite, at least a wish from NATO, NATO international staff, that we use a more proactive and robust stance. Whether that will fly well, I'll tell you in June. But that's where we are. No applause.
I have a question also to Mr. Ellerman Kingombe, because you mentioned security guarantees before. I'm curious, what do you think about the following? We see that with every year, this war costs more and more to Ukraine and partners. And don't you think that by providing the membership at NATO to Ukraine, that would actually cut the war? Because Russia always blames West and NATO that they gave some promises to Ukraine. And what is the more radical decision or action? To let this war last, or actually to take away this playing card from Russia?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's for a country in our hemisphere to and we strongly believe in this, they have the possibility to apply for membership. NATO has said, we did that in Washington of last summer, that Ukraine is on what we call an irreversible path to NATO, that Ukraine's future is in NATO. I think that's what we've said, that's on paper. But then again, it also says when allies deem that they are ready, and that takes 32 allies. It has not been said that such a decision should be part of a peace agreement. So I think, where we are now, the ambition and what we are hoping to help Ukraine achieve is, as I said, a just peace, a lasting peace, and for such a peace to be, you would need robust security guarantees. Now, what you describe is one option for those. There are probably other options. Where that ends, on verra, as we say in Brussels. But that's not. I mean, that is. I think that is at the core of some of the difficult discussions that will be taking place over the next weeks and months. But you need 32 countries, 32 allies, to agree as far as NATO membership is concerned.
I think, Veronica, we have one more question to go, and then we're going to listen to some music and call it a night. Last question.
Yes, hi, I'm not a journalist, but I do have a question. It's from Becca about Russian misinformation. So I'm not personally familiar with Russian misinformation, and that's not because I don't know the stories, but because I refuse to consume any news from social media. And I have a feeling, I mean, it's a great media diet that I would recommend anyone, but I cannot enforce that. Now that we see that these American corporations that control our news, Instagram, Meta, and Twitter, have such an enormous role in spreading misinformation, should the message that we share with people not simply be to completely quit with this kind of news consumption? That be the main message, that this is simply no longer media, it is a complete network of propaganda.
You're a wise man. So, what Elon Musk has done with X and what Zuckerberg now did with Meta is they removed basically all guardrails and all safety measures that used to some degree counter disinformation and propaganda, and especially these automated manipulation efforts. So all those are gone. So it's a wild west right now. I would even go as far as say that TikTok is one of the safest options today, and that's a Chinese spy app. So that's I don't know if anybody should be there. But the problem is that we've opened this Pandora's box. It's very difficult to close. So I don't know if you have kids, but if you have a teenager kid at home and you tell them you cannot go on social media anymore, they're gonna be extremely upset. Or just anybody here who uses social media, and just tell them that you have to stop. I don't think that's gonna happen. That's not realistic. I think we need more mechanisms like Digital Services Act in the EU. Some of you, or especially in America, will call it a censorship leg, but it's a system that puts some responsibility on the owners of these platforms. So I think we need to hold these people responsible for the information that is being shared online, because it's extremely harmful. And as we saw with the German elections, and probably we will see with the Romanian presidential election, these platforms will be used for election interference, and they are being used for that by the owners of these platforms, like Elon Musk. So if we don't hold them accountable, then we will lose this game. I don't think we can ban social media. It's here to stay. We just have to kind of put some kind of guardrails around the whole system.
We are going to listen to some more music. We're happy to. And I'm inviting the three musicians from Ukraine to take place there again. I want to really thank Kira Lebedenko, Pekka Kallio-Niemi, and Jean-Charles Ellerman-Kingombe for being here and sharing your thoughts. Jante van Schijk and Veronica Baas for organizing it as one of the editors of the Balie. Thanking you for being here. Wonderful that you're here on these sort of topics. Turns out, of course, at the end of the evening, we're much more concerned and confused than at the beginning. That's part of the experience of the Balie, I'm afraid. Looks like the EU is turning into a major player in our security because of the big tech firms from America, which is being misused to undercut our safety and undercut the narratives. I just learned that in Georgia, Meta is sharing information of activists who are up against their government protesting, private information being shared by Meta to the police and to the government in Georgia. So we're in for a really, really rough time. It's a Wild West, to quote Pekka. Thank you very much. And again, wonderful that you're here. We're going to listen a little bit to some more music. What are you going to play for us?
Before we will play, we want to say thank to Balie for organizing this important event, discussion. And we want to say thank you for inviting us as a musician. And I want to say really big thanks to my friends. It's thanks them. They made it possible to be there for for Andrei and Misha today, and they give us support and love and many warm. It's our friends, and this is really important to have it. Thank you. And it is so important for us to be there, to bring Ukrainian culture, like music. It's a big part of the culture, and it's very important to bring it now to people, to you, to all people, to make our connection more deeper, more understandable, to from our hearts to your. And it's make I think the world, the peace was make a little stronger, and connection between different nationalities, but European, but we have the same valuable things, like peace, like families, like love, like friendship, and we want to keep it and to be strong. We need to be strong to stay alive for now. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.